Hello, Garland Nixon here with my good friend Dr. Tony Monteiro, one of our most popular guests on this channel, and we got a lot of important things to talk about. Let's talk. Hello, Garland here with Dr. Tony Monteiro. And once again, we got a join button. So don't forget, if you want to join the channel, become a member, please click the join button and become a member. All right, we're going to get right to it. A lot of important things to really discuss here. And something it's just been aggravating me, Tony. It's been aggravating me so bad. And I want to get your thoughts on it. And here's what it is. So, a lot of us who have moral positions have been discussing the issue of the Democratic Party aligning with the John Boltons and Dick Cheneys of the world, justifying a genocide, refusing to back off that, justifying aligning with literal Nazis, literal proud card-carrying Nazis in Ukraine, in what is obviously a proxy war that they even admitted. Okay. And now that Trump won, they're trying to reclaim some moral position. Yes, we've got to stand up against Trump because he's fill in the blank. He's a racist. He's going to do bad things. I had somebody call me and say, well, looks like it's 1936. The Nazis are back. And I'm like, well, if the Nazis was back, Biden would be sending them money and arms. Apparently, they can't be back. He would be arming them and aligning with them. And I was like, and it just hit me after I hung up. I'm like, how can they? And now this big thing. Oh, what is it? Elon Musk did a Nazi salute. Okay, I'm no fan of billionaires, as you know. But my point is this. How can you align with Nazis, commit a genocide, and then as soon as Trump wins, revert to the position that you have the moral high ground? Tony, your thoughts?
Yeah, I kind of agree with you. The Democratic Party, the leadership of it, are flailing or trying to find some way to explain the world. And in so doing, to create a strategy, to discover a strategy by which they will win in the next presidential election, or at least the congressional and senatorial elections in 2026. But and so they're trying to, on the one side, frame their cause as a moral cause, that they, while losing the political struggle, will win the moral struggle, that they will be seen, and this, I think we must understand this, they want to brand themselves as the party of the civil rights movement. Literally, Martin Luther King handed off the baton of civil and human rights to the Democratic Party. And in making that appeal, win back the working class. I think they've lost the working class for a long time. Maybe they will never win the working class back. This is hugely important given that the Democratic Party, as we've so often said, is the party or was the party of Franklin Delano Roosevelt, and if you wish, of Lyndon B. Johnson and the signing of the civil rights bills. And then, Obama being the first Black president and he being a Democrat. So many people take this as a sign that the Democratic Party is the party of social and economic progress, the party of civil rights, of women's rights, of labor rights. But it is not that. And this is a difficult thing for a lot of people to grasp. And the other side of this equation is that Trump is a fascist, that what happened on November 5th, 2024, was a counter-revolution and the ascendancy to power of a fascist movement. I consider the talking heads and the thinkers and strategists of the Democratic Party to be going, between stools, between positions. Sometimes they're the moral party, the party of moral values. At other times, they are the anti-fascist party. And at that point, they go to the lunatic fringe. And there is a lunatic fringe among the left and among the Democrats. So, and then, of course, the constant thing in the New York Times and the Financial Times and Washington Post. What will Trump do? And thus it descends into a type of pop psychology, trying to understand his brain, how he thinks, what turns him on. He's an egotist, he's a narcissist, and so on. But my thinking is that it's not what Trump wants to do, what can Trump do? We are in a different moment in history than 2017. In some ways, where we are today is can be attributed to the recklessness of the Biden administration, pushing Russia and China together, pushing more countries towards BRICS, and policies, of course, in Europe, the war to literally overturn the government of Russia, which effectively has ended up by turning the people of various European countries against the ruling elite. So I'm not going to sit here and try to explain everything that Trump says or attempt to predict everything that he will do. But as you have mentioned, we do know certain things. He reached out to Putin and Xi Jinping. Big and important move, given that the US, Russia, and China are the major nuclear powers in the world. He reaches out to them. We do know that we have a ceasefire in Gaza. And many analysts see this as a strategic defeat for Israel and the Israeli Defense Forces, and a victory for the resistance forces and Hamas. We do know that the election of 2024 ousted the most dangerous war makers who have ever occupied presidential authority in this country. We came and are probably still closer to nuclear war than we've ever been. This is in a situation where neither Russia nor China want war, let alone nuclear war. But it was the Biden administration that pursued policies of brinksmanship. Now, if the defeat of Kamala Harris and Joe Biden is a counter-revolution, please someone explain to me how the question of war and peace, and this administration being an administration of war, how those issues are calculated into this idea that now we're closer to fascism than we've ever been. I thought that any definition of fascism was that fascism was committed to war, that Nazis are committed to war. How do we explain what Trump has thus far done? And that is not to say, given the makeup of his administration that we are home free. No, we are not. Those appointments of the National Security Advisor, the Secretary of State, the Secretary of Defense are troubling and dangerous. However, the ball is not just in the court of Trump. I think the ball is in the court of the American people and the people of the world. When the majority of people of the global South, and I'm talking about in the 70%, say that they do not trust, nor do they support the American government, by which at that point they meant the Biden government. More global South nations are welcoming a change from that to the Trump administration. Then, of course, the people of the major capitalist countries in Europe are saying in no uncertain terms that their governments do not represent them. And this is in the high 60s. And then when you come to the United States, you know, we've seen the polls, we've talked about them so often. Nobody in the United States, or only a small part of the US people, are happy with the United States government. Most people, irrespective of their being liberal, conservative, Democrats, Republicans, independent, are against the US government. This is a new moment. And Trump can talk, but then he has to come up against the very people that made him and elected him. And that's, I think, where we are. You're muted. You're muted.
Okay. You know, something, you know, I've had some questions in my mind, and I'm just going to throw them at you one at a time, and we'll go here. You know, one of the things that Malcolm X said is that one thing worse than hating a man is teaching a man to hate himself. And I'm sure you've heard various iterations of those comments, right? Of that disruption of a culture, disruption of people, misleading a group of people is worse than hating that people, to take them in a bad direction. Here's what I mean. And I'm sure you see it. There are people I see in our community, right, who are intellectuals, friends, family members, people I've known for years, right? And when I hear them talk politics now, it's irrational, completely irrational. They just watch MSNBC all the time. People that, like, they were telling me the other day, of somebody I know was telling me how Joe Biden got the ceasefire. And I said, well, and I showed him a thing. I said, look, it's from Israeli newspapers. Here's one after the other after the other. It says Trump forced the cease. Oh, that's bad news. That's fake news. They're not rational. I realized at that point, there was no evidence I could give them. Joe Biden could have walked up to them in person and say, no, it wasn't me, it was Trump. They would have called him a liar. So, and I'm sure you see it. And they're trying, these people, for some reason, you know, when Trump first won in 2017, they jumped on this thing that Trump's an evil, racist, fascist, and they ran with that. He's a Russian Putin bot, all these things they ran with, right? And we saw Biden with the fascist things that he did, the commitment to war, the censorship, all these terrible things, right, that people rejected. And they think that they can jump right back to 2017 with the exact same arguments that they've had before. And number two, they are so irrational that when I talk to them, I'm like, yeah, they got all that stuff off of MSNBC, New York Times, whatever. So the other part is they've created, not in the Black community, in the so-called liberal community, an irrational method of thinking that thinks they can jump right back to 2017 and go with the Trump's a racist, evil, fascist, Putin stuff all over again. Like nothing, there's no context of 4 years of these, what I call the Dick Cheney Democrats. Your thoughts about all of that?
Yeah, well, you know, I would say we're talking about Black folk now, and I think it is very appropriate that we do for all kinds of reasons. Sadly, too many podcasts don't even have Black people on them, let alone acknowledge the central role of Black people. You know, it's so interesting, Garland, that podcasting like so much else in political and intellectual discourse, becomes a white thing, a white people's thing, a white male thing. And this is from the left, but let's put that aside for a moment. But at least we have people like you and others who feel that Black people are significant. The way Black people see the world is very significant. And in fact, what Black people do can decide the future of this country. But Black people will not jump on any and everything that is popular. I think that what happened in the 2024 election, where Black people increasingly went with Trump, not with the Republican Party, but with Trump, says something very significant. I think that Trump winning the three major battleground states of Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin had to do with the Black vote, either by voting for Trump or a third party or not voting at all. I know that was the case in Philadelphia and probably in Detroit and other cities in Michigan and Milwaukee and Wisconsin. That vote was enough to give Trump an electoral college victory and a popular vote victory. So what Black people do in a situation where the divisions in the country are so great, where the class divisions among white people are so intense. In other words, there is no single white position. White people are divided primarily along class lines. And that's what the election showed. That's what Trump's movement shows. White people are divided along class lines. Black folk are the balance that could shift it one way or the other. In the 2024 election, the Democrats felt they would win the Black vote because here was Kamala Harris, a Black woman, and that would excite Black people, and every celebrity, Black celebrity you can imagine, was brought out to support her. Well, it didn't work. It didn't work because the same processes taking place among white people, that is a class division, is taking place among Black people. Black people are divided along class lines. Their attitudes towards Trump are pretty much correlated to class. The working class among Black people found much to identify in Trump, especially the jobs question as a consequence of the unmanaged, uncontrolled immigration, where you bring poor people from Latin America in to compete for jobs with poor Black people. And, you know, in that equation, the poor Black person loses her or his job to an immigrant who's forced to work for less. You take the question of inflation, of course, but then you take the question of the war in Gaza, the Israeli war, and then the war in Ukraine, where some say upwards of $200 billion from the United States was spent in the Ukraine. And Black people say, well, what about schools? What about healthcare? What about housing here in the United States? Which position them on the side of peace and against Biden. So Black people will be very, very important going forward. If you want, we could talk more about that, about the logic of U.S. history, about the revolutionary process in the United States, about African Americans functioning as an Achilles heel to U.S. empire and to the U.S. war makers have in the past, and I think will in this period going forward. I think many Black people are concerned about the Trump movement and Trump himself. Trump talks too much. He is too spontaneous. And in a lot of ways, it kind of turns Black people off. Our sensibilities are not like that. Most of us grew up on Martin Luther King's speeches and so on. I'll just leave it there. But the same anger that we see generally in the country and among white folk is probably more intense among Black people. In this respect, I've said this before, my focus in doing political analysis and even geopolitical analysis is upon the people. What will the people do? What will the people allow leaders and politicians to do, allow the government to do? And I insist, Trump did not make the movement that elected him. The people made that movement. The people are awake in ways that they have not been. They are politically awake. Is it at the level that we want it to be? Not yet. But they can make Trump, they can break Trump. Even in the MAGA movement, there are divisions along class lines. Just because you saw all of those tech oligarchs on the stage didn't mean they will decide history, because there was clapback against them, on several questions. Vivek Ramaswamy, who was big in the Trump movement, had to leave his position and go back to Ohio because he disparaged American working people, calling them lazy and not wanting to work and so on. They had to get him out of the way. So this is what we're looking at. The situation is very fluid. The domestic realignment is going forward, and the world realignment, which is way ahead of what's the alignment going on in this country. Trump might talk a lot, but when the rubber meets the road, he will have to meet with Putin. Trump will not dictate anything in terms of peace agreements in the Ukraine. Putin and Lavrov and Medvedev and all of those leaders of Russia have said, we have the upper hand and we will defeat the Ukrainian military, no matter what kind of weapons you want to give them. And we will decide ultimately the terms of the peace. But the other thing is, and I find this deeply interesting, Trump suspending for 90 days foreign aid, including military aid to the Ukrainian government. I think in the overall balance, I think Trump has, in this 1 week, done more to diffuse the fires of war and to reverse the trajectory, the logic of the Biden foreign policy, which brought us closer to war and closer to nuclear war. You're muted.
Forgetting that. Let's discuss that. Donald Trump gets elected. Within a week and a half or so, let's go the last couple of weeks, the things that we have seen, to be quite frank, I've never seen from president before. We see him putting out social media posts with Jeffrey Sachs disparaging things about Benjamin Netanyahu. We see everything I read says he said to the Israelis, you have to do this, and they did it. They weren't happy about it. But Donald Trump gives a speech. I watched all his speeches, and he says, I want to be known as a peacemaker. I've never heard that from an American president before. He calls the president of China. We've been hearing, China's got spy balloons, China's evil, they're trying to do this bad things, oh, they're terrible. He gets off the phone, he says, I talked with the Chinese, I said, we're going to have a good relationship and we can bring peace to the world together. At that point, I'm like, my head's spinning, right? Then I hear he wants to talk with President Putin as soon as possible. I read all of the Russian press and all that I'm reading. They're saying Putin was apparently speeding to the Kremlin to have a big meeting. They come out of the meeting and he says, I'm ready to talk with Trump. Now, Colonel Larry Wilkerson, I was fortunate a couple of weeks ago. I had dinner with him in Washington, D.C. And he talked about just gave me something that happened in the past, as an insider that he saw, and how it's something that, how people from this country talking with people from some adversaries country stopped the war, stopped the problem. And he talked about Trump particularly. And he said, I'm no Trump fan. He says, but you've got to talk. If you discuss, Biden forbid anyone in his cabinet from talking with the Russians. Trump says, I want to meet with Putin. Putin looks around and says, I'm ready to talk. Let's do it. You got a chance. So I've seen him say, we got to stop this war in the Middle East. Talk with President Xi. We want peace. He didn't say we are going to protect Taiwan and fight for them like Biden. We'll talk with Russia. And apparently he said, I want to talk with Putin and Xi. The three of us need to have a great power meeting. And might I add, he's now said we need to reduce our nuclear arsenal. And I want to talk with the Russians. And the Russians said, we're ready to talk about some kind of a new nuclear deal and reducing our nuclear arsenal. And I'm like, as you said, in 1 week, and I'm not even a Trump fan or not a Trump. I'm not a Trump fan or not a Trump fan. I'm neither of those. I'm a fan for justice and peace. In 1 week, I don't need, I'm, as I said, I'm left with my head spinning. I don't know what to think next. Your thoughts on these moves that are, I'm going to be honest with you. These are some of the greatest and most profound moves for peace that I have seen by any president of the United States in my lifetime in 1 week. I just got to be honest.
No, and see, if we want to talk about democracy, which I want to talk about, in fact, a new democracy, a people's democracy, a revolutionary democracy. The logic of the revolutionary process in the United States must have a seizure of power in the name of democracy by the people. That's not going to happen overnight. But one thing is for certain, there cannot be a successful struggle for democracy unless it is side by side with the struggle for peace. So you could say that, well, Trump has authoritarian and dictatorial proclivities, that he is comfortable with oligarchs and so on. However, if he makes steps towards peace and what back in the days was called peaceful coexistence, détente, if he makes honest and sincere moves in that direction, he creates better conditions for the struggle for democracy. Martin Luther King understood this so well. How can we forget, we Black folk, how can we forget his stance on peace as an integral part of the fight for civil and human rights? He never separated them, nor should we. But then, just look at this, and Garland, we're talking about individual actions in the last week, where he takes Secret Service protection away from John Bolton and Mike Pompeo, and in fact revoked their national security clearances, where they're just another citizen. They're not in a privileged position. Well, what does that say? And these are two of the most virulent advocates of war, including war with China, Russia, and Iran. So at some point, we who are committed to change, as Sweet Honey in the Rock said, we who believe in freedom, if you believe sincerely in the rights of the people, these moves towards peace have to be considered seriously. Now, people will say, well, Trump is playing a bait and switch game. He's going to say peace in order to go to war. Well, what evidence do we have of that? What evidence do we have of that? That's an assumption that Trump cannot be trusted, that Trump lies. These are assumptions promoted by Trump's enemies, especially in the deep state, repeated by so-called liberals, so-called progressives, and so-called leftists. Trump cannot be trusted. Well, I guess you trusted Biden. I guess you trusted other presidents. You know, I guess they were telling the truth all the time. Well, not hardly. But then the world, the objective conditions are so different. And the people of the United States are vastly different in this time than they were at the time of the civil rights and anti-war movements. The American people have seen for themselves that the ruling elite of this country lie, cannot be trusted, and do everything to mess over them. And they're drawing the right conclusions. And any idea that the mass of white working people are a counter-revolutionary settler colony that will always side with fascism and counter-revolution, all of that is based upon assumptions rather than real empirical evidence. The other thing about it, this modern day, as I would call it, identity politics or postmodern political analysis. By postmodern, we mean for the left, a lot of leftists, everything since the collapse of the Soviet Union. Because a lot of them who were at one time leftists and radicals and communists and revolutionaries have now joined the ranks of the neoliberal establishment. You know, they try to keep their distance somehow by the language they use. But in actuality, they are foot soldiers for the neoliberal war makers, for the neoliberal war makers. And no matter how often and how many different ways the people keep saying, we want peace. We want peace. We don't want to study war no more. We want the nation to be rebuilt. We want the nation to be reindustrialized. We want jobs. We want education. We want healthcare. We want housing. And you can't do that by spending trillions of dollars in wars that the United States empire never wins. They only create chaos. I think that's the situation. In that regard, I think I agree with your sentiment. I think we're together on this, that that the world has changed. Peace is now more possible, given the fact that we saw how close we have come to world war. Peace is more possible. The people's sentiments are more towards peace than ever, I think, than ever. And that's what we must build upon. That's the politics, I think, of the left, of the revolutionary forces, if they are genuine.
And I'll say this. Again, this paradigm has been created, right? And the paradigm works like this. Either you completely hate and oppose Trump for everything that he does, or you're a Trump supporter who loves the ground Trump walks on and supports everything. No, you can't do an intellectual critique. You can't do the old, and I've heard this, what the working classes should be doing when it comes to politics and voting. You probably heard this, I've said a million times, WIIFM, what's in it for me, right? That's politics. That's old school politics. Working class comes together and we're going to do what's in it for us. Okay. But instead now, and I even see it in the chat sometimes, if we do an intellectual critique of Donald Trump and say he's really good, this area, boy, I'm glad that, not he's good or bad, I'm glad we got this change in this area. Well, we're going to have problems because he's going to be regional, Cuba, Nicaragua, Venezuela. We're going to have to fight him tooth and nail on these things. They're to preserve their revolutionary governments and allow them to have freedom and independence. That's going to be a problem. Just a critique where you say, this is good about the Trump movement or whatever. This is bad. This is a problem. And you'll look and people are like, oh, but Trump did this. Oh, but Trump's bad. Oh, but Trump's going to do this. Where they can't accept the critique that breaks down the various good, bad, and indifferent things of the Trump movement. Sometimes you don't even see it as Trump. You see it as the political dynamic, right? But they've left us with this thing where if you say, as I said, wow, he called Putin and Xi and said, I want to be a peacemaker. I don't know how long that's going to last. I don't know if that's where he's going, but damn if I ain't going to support that. I'm going to support that. Okay. And then in turn, I got to hear, yeah, but look what he did over here. I'm not talking about what people can't accept looking at Trump with a scalpel rather than a sledgehammer. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. Evaluating it with a scalpel rather than a sledgehammer or axe.
Yeah, because again, it goes back to their fundamental assumptions that he is a fascist. That's where they begin. And they've trumpeted that for now 10 years or more. They've trumpeted it. They champion that. And I'm most concerned about those on the so-called left, the black left and the white left, who begin with Trump as a fascist, that what we are waging by supporting Kamala or supporting Hillary or supporting Biden, we're a part of a broad people's alliance against fascism. I question the assumption itself that Trump is a fascist. Just because you don't agree with him, is he a fascist? Suppose his policies of détente and peaceful coexistence. We are not yet at that level that King talked about, a positive peace, a peace with justice, a peace with democracy. We're not there. And perhaps statesmen and presidents cannot affect that. That is on the shoulders of the people to give peace a deeper substance, to turn a negative peace, let us say a détente, into a positive peace, a peace with justice. That falls upon our shoulders, But of course, when you're dealing with political and intellectual laziness, which I think most of the left have become, if your thing is, well, we're going to demonstrate against Trump's inauguration because he is a fascist. I mean, if that's your thing, well, go ahead. But don't be surprised when working people either ignore you or turn against you. And so the left is without a constituency. I think that is basically the case right now, given the extreme positions they took on cultural issues. You see what I'm saying? They're without a constituency, except for some, people at universities or whatever. But look, man, this is a time of vast change. The potential for change is greater now than any time in the last 60 years. Trump is not, as Ross Douthat of the New York Times writes, Trump is a man of destiny, using Hegel's idea of the great man, and of course Hegel was referencing Napoleon. But then Karl Marx said that history comes in twos. First is tragedy, then is farce. The great man of destiny in terms of the American history, an American revolutionary process, is Martin Luther King. Trump is a lesser figure than Martin Luther King. He is what Marx would call a farce, an imitation of the great man. Nonetheless, he is a force in history, and I would argue more positive than negative. I think that point can be successfully defended. And in that regard, I even though I'm very critical of podcasts and people who think that being a revolutionary is to have a podcast, you excluded, Garland. But then there is some value when you can hear a wide array of views. And for example, a committed neocon like Robert Kagan, the husband of Victoria Nuland, the well-known coup plotter in the Ukraine and war maker. We know of her. But he said, in effect, and he doesn't like Trump. He was a Republican who left the Republican Party because of Trump. But he said, look, the U.S. empire is in retreat. It is not as great, quote, great as it was or as a lot of people want it to be. And Trump will perhaps be a necessary corrective to the direction of policymakers of the U.S. empire. In fact, Robert Kagan says almost every president since the end of the Soviet Union has either been a mediocrity or an out-and-out idiot, and so on, that none of them were up to the challenge. And he says Trump, now this is from an imperialist, a neocon, that Trump is more competent. In fact, he calls Trump a man of destiny. But then you get, I think, calmer heads and more competent analysts like a John Mearsheimer. He is not pro-Trump. He is not even for détente with China. He sees a competition, but not war. And he sees Trump as mainly positive. And then, of course, others, Alexander Mercurius, I'll just mention those few, but who sees it the same way. Scott Ritter, the same way. They see an opening for peace, and an opening for peace is ultimately an opening for democracy. It is more pro-people. That is to say, if you can engineer peace, if, as Trump has done, you put a hold on all foreign aid, military and otherwise, for 90 days, well, that's almost like saying to Zelensky and those in the Ukraine that I am giving you the poison to kill yourself with. Because you cannot, Ukraine cannot fight the Russians without an infusion regularly of US weapons and so on. He does that. Many people get it all confused. When he posted that Jeffrey Sachs lecture, Well, Jeffrey Sachs wasn't just talking about the Gazans and the war in Gaza, the genocide. He was talking about war with Iran. And Trump posted all of that, which would suggest that he does not want a war with Iran. And there's some evidence for that going even back, I think, to 2019 with the Iranians shooting down a US missile and people in the Pentagon wanting to go to war with Iran over that. And he squashed it. And that is to his credit. But if you think in the old way, if you have an old epistemology, if you have, rather than an empirical, realistic approach to politics, domestic and international, if you want to proceed dogmatically from your assumptions, then I think you're going to be found to be a failed analyst, a failed intellectual. And most of what we now see online, and especially in podcasts, will be seen as rubbish that will be kicked to the trash bin of history. So much of this is nonsense, and again, proceeding from assumptions that are inaccurate and untrue.
Let me ask you this about the Black elite, the Black intelligentsia, etc. Right? I've told you before the election, people kept saying, Trump's going to win. Trump's going to win. Trump's going to win. And people ask why. And as you said, you and I, we're more into evaluating feedback from ordinary people, right? And I said, I go into Baltimore and I see Black folks, Black men riding around with a Trump sticker on. I've never seen that before. I have a friend, again, a Black man, late 40s, maybe 50 years old. He has a successful landscaping company. That's blue collar. That's a man getting his hands dirty. Started off cutting grass, making good living. Now, telling me about how much gas he paid for gas now, but how much less it was under Trump, feeling me out. I could tell what he was saying. Man, inflation's too high for me. I might have to vote for Trump. It's like he was kind of looking for me to say it's okay. You know what I mean? And I started seeing ordinary people have had enough. I had people telling me, oh, yeah, I'm tired of the Democrats, blah, blah, blah. Different things. Let's just say some of the cultural things that weren't all of that as popular in the Black community, especially among Black men, as the Democrats would like to believe, and things like that. And so the Black working class, I'm not saying they all voted for Trump. What do you like? 1 out of 4 Black men in some country, in some state? That's unheard of. 1 out of 5 nationwide, 20%, unheard of. Barack Obama got 96 or 7%, and Trump gets 20%. You know what I mean? So my point being this, and that is, you have Black people who are peeling away in big numbers from the Democratic Party. A lot of them vote for Trump. As you said, some vote for Jill Stein, staying home, whatever. But we still got this Black intelligentsia who's stuck in 2017. And they're saying the exact same things with the exact same mentality, as though Joe Biden didn't send all of our money, ignore our community. Send all the money over for Ukraine, the warmongers and all that. Almost drag us into civil war. Black folks and minorities always are always on the front lines when there's a war. They're all going to be there on the front lines. Mm-hmm. And they're pretending as though nothing changed, as though we don't have a context from 4 years of these maniacs in the Biden administration. And I'm like, how can you? It's like this Black intelligentsia is totally divided and disconnected from the struggle of poor Black folks who said, you know what, any port in the storm, as they say, hey, this looks like a different option. I've heard people say, I would give Trump a shot. They didn't think he was great, but it was any port in the storm. But you got this Black intelligentsia. I listen to these people and I'm like, they're so disconnected from working class and working poor people. Your thoughts?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I would kind of separate for the sake of this analysis, what we call the Black intelligentsia, the Black academics, the so-called thought leaders of the Black community. I would put them on one side, and then the Black political class. Now they are kind of interconnected, but I think they are different entities. The Black political class, for its own selfish reasons, and they are selfish, and they do put their personal interests ahead of the interests of Black folk, they are bound to the Democratic establishment, the Democratic Party establishment. That's how they get reelected. That's how they get paid. That's how they get health care. That's, and on and on and on. They are a complete, they are debased. They are morally corrupt and politically corrupt. I would say, until proven otherwise, most Black politicians are corrupt, have been corrupted. They go to the highest bidder. They're for sale. I know that is the case here in Philadelphia. It is disgraceful, Garland. And I think, we see it more concretely when we look at individual cities. I know in Baltimore, I think you guys got a more corrupt Black political class than we have here in Philadelphia, and we have nothing to write home about. And oh, by the way, and of course, the Black political class in New York is in a deep crisis, with Eric Adams seeming to be prepared to align with Trump, for reasons that we can talk about. But I think we're going to find that more often. However, the Black political class has been useless to Black people. You don't have a John Conyers or Ron Dellums or Shirley Chisholm or anything like that today. They're lockstep in supporting the Democratic Party leaders and on and on and on. The Black intelligentsia has been degraded over the last 30 years. Just degraded. Most of them became captured by identity politics and postmodernism. What do I mean by that? They moved from what was the foundation of the Black intellectual and academic during the time of the civil rights and Black power movements, which was political economy and sociology. Young Black thinkers increasingly talked about the political economy of the country, the class nature of the country, and so on. Well, somewhere around the early 1990s, they shifted from economics, politics, war, and peace to cultural issues, by which academics became experts in gender, transgender issues, that Blackness was not a marker for struggle for freedom, but became a kind of a marker for a kind of cultural and narrative approach. In other words, you don't talk about Black people in terms of the struggle for freedom and the unfulfilled aspirations of the Black masses. Now Black people are a marker for gender, culture, intersectionality, and a whole lot of other language that most people wouldn't understand anyway. So they became academics. Academic careers and academic success trumped their relationship to the masses. So they got university jobs, they published books, but they lost their bearings among the people. Now, if you take the two sides and you put them together, it has turned out to be nothing short of a disaster for Black people. Their corruption has affected all Black institutions. For example, the Black church, which, unable to find its way theologically and morally with the end of the civil rights movement, began to look to these academics and politicians for a theology, for a language, for an epistemology. The Black politicians were a way of bringing whatever little funds they could get and guaranteeing that the local preacher would be invited to the Democratic Party dinner in your local city, or maybe at the level of the national party. So we're going to have to reinvent both politics and the intelligentsia in the Black community. We are going to have to reinvent it. And in so doing, we're going to have a renaissance of our fundamental institutions, the churches, the historically Black colleges and universities, the fraternal organization. We are going to have a focus singularly upon the cause of Black freedom, democracy, and world peace. We're going to have to go back to that. What we have today is pretty much useless. They publish books, they publish essays, they give speeches. But outside of that, they don't do very much, at least when it comes to the people.
Well, as an example, I know someone who was offered a chairmanship of a department at a very, very famous historical Black college, right? Mm-hmm. And he said, I'll accept it. And he was supposed to, and somehow they found out he had spoken out against the Ukraine conflict and called it a proxy war and said, we need to get out. And he'd taken an intellectual position that could be supported with fact. Mm-hmm. They called him over there and they said, oh, we've got some issues with your position on Ukraine. This is a Black college. Mm-hmm. And he said, well, here's my positions and here's why. And I will submit you whatever you need to support my positions. It's never mind. We can't use you. Now tell me, so what that tells me is this. The people at leading this historical Black college were put in place by people. They were funded and controlled by people who were pushing these whatever you want to call them, these imperialists, any word you want to use, narratives, so much so that they couldn't bring a person that either Black intelligentsia, Black college. They can't bring a man in there because he takes a position on foreign policy that he can justify with imperial facts. But it doesn't work for the narrative. Again, it's what you said about the corruption of our institutions.
Yeah. It's and of our politicians. I honestly, Garland, I don't see any evidence to the contrary. You take the cases of Jamal Bowman in New York and Cori Bush in Missouri. They spoke out against the genocide in Gaza and the Zionist establishment said, we're going to defeat you and we're going to put millions and millions of dollars into a race to get you out of office. I didn't hear Jim Clyburn saying we're going to stand up for our Congressional Black Caucus members. I didn't hear Hakeem Jeffrey. I didn't hear Gregory Meeks. I didn't hear any of the Congressional Black Caucus saying we will defend the right of our members to speak and dissent and to hold dissenting views. They said, no, do whatever you want to them because they don't count. That is a marker, an indication of a deep corruption of the Black political class. And the same with academics. You talk about this gentleman who was offered the job, guaranteed the job, and then probably when elements of the deep state, maybe the FBI, who have followed his career, found out what his positions were, the university said, well, we don't, the deal is off, don't come down here because we don't need the views that you represent. In spite of the fact that we claim that the university is supposed to uphold freedom of speech, meaning freedom to dissent, but not if you challenge the war makers. And that's not just Black colleges. That is the major white universities. The spectacle last spring of presidents of universities, Harvard, University of Pennsylvania, and other places being fired because they did not, quote, stand up to anti-Semitism, meaning protest against a genocide at their universities. I guess they assume that is the presidents that were fired, that universities should at least respect some level of dissent. But they were fired. Money trumped constitutional rights. So it's all over the place. And I am concerned about the Black community, because Black people have the richest experience and the highest development of consciousness with respect to the struggle for human rights and democratic rights of any group in this society. And even though we are not where we were during the time of the fight for civil rights and against the war in Vietnam, we are not there right now. We still have that legacy and that memory, and it can be awakened under the proper conditions. And if there are those among us who have the courage to challenge the existing political order. And that's what's before us. What is the task of the intellectual? What is the task of the journalist? What is the task of the political politicians, of the freedom fighter? It is to fight for freedom. If you're not going to do that, if you're a tool of the neoliberal, neocon war makers, then be that. But don't act like you're leading the Black community, because you're not. And I think our obligation, people like yourself and me, is to call this out and to name it, not to be silent in the face of it, not to be in some kind of fictional anti-fascist alliance. That's a fiction. There's no anti-fascist popular front. We have to, people like us must call it out, must name it, and be prepared to accept whatever the blowback is against us, because the truth is the final arbiter. The truth. And here, it's not, you don't have to look far. I mean, that's W.E.B. Du Bois. That's James Baldwin. That's Martin Luther King. That's Diane Nash out of Nashville, Tennessee, the great Nashville movement. That's James Lawson. So what are we going to do? Oh, no, that's the bygone days. The values of that period, of those freedom fighters, don't apply now. I think they apply more today than they did then. So this is a time for Black intellectuals, real Black intellectuals, real Black activists to stand up and join the fight against our own misleadership class, against our own people who look like us but are not a part of us. And I guess I would start in this respect with Barack Obama. Look like us, but really is not a part of us. Kamala Harris, you look like us, but you're really not a part of us. And and then from there go forward. And the authority for people like us is not the elite, is not AIPAC, is not Zionism or the leaders of the Democratic Party. We get our authority from our people and from our history. And we should never retreat from that. We should never allow our history and our great figures, our great thinkers, to be drugged through the mud, to be trivialized, to be undermined, and to be told, we being told that that is of the past and it is not relevant today. So that's the spirit that I operate from.
You know, one last thing I'd like to ask, throw at you and get some thoughts on. Something that you said, I don't remember exactly what it was, but made me think about this. Okay. You know, I felt like, oh, we're in a world of trouble. Are we going to have World War III? Are we going to have nuclear war? Are we going to die? Is it all over with? Right. Okay. Along comes Trump. And as I said, it seems like maybe there's some detente going on, something happening. As you said, based on what he said, now, I don't know if it's true, false, or indifferent. He said more than detente. It said, I'm going to work with the Chinese leader to bring peace to the world. That's far more than detente, right? We can work together. We need to have a great power meeting. We need to get rid of some of these nuclear weapons. And the Russians are like, yeah, we sure do. That's more than just detente. That's saying we're going to build a friendship. We're going to work together. Okay, here's my point.
I think you're right, Garland.
All of the business of people who want to criticize Donald Trump or who want to vilify him or lionize him, that's up to you. Mm-hmm. But if he's there for 4 years doing that kind of stuff, doesn't that give us 4 years to do what we want to do?
Absolutely.
Well, all those people, Trump's doing this, Trump's doing that, Trump's going to do this. Wait a minute. You got a 4-year period here that he's in there, like him not or whatever, right? It's an opportunity for people to say, well, at least we probably ain't going to get nuked for 4 years. At least we got a different direction, maybe. In light of that, we can, I don't know if you want, look, I don't know if it's you want to build a new party, if you want to make more people independent, if you want to create a peace movement, I don't know what it is. But all the yapping by, as I said, these intellectuals and other people day and night, like a bunch of chihuahuas, you know, like a little yappy dog about Trump, is not saying it's time for action. Let's do something. Yeah. That's what I don't hear. Well, you know, Trump's going to do this. What do you think? Well, we've got a panel here to talk about Trump and what he's done and what he might do and what he's thinking and what he ain't thinking. That panel ain't doing me no good. They're not saying here's a time where we can act, where we have maybe as you could say, an interregnum, if we see it as a time of change, right, and as of a time of opportunity. What is it they used to say? Hard times is working times. Mm-hmm. Even if you think he's the worst person in the world, you're not telling me anything about doing anything. You're just going on and on about how bad you hate him and what you think he is. Anyway, your thoughts?
Yeah, no, I agree with you. But I guess that's a way to get hits on YouTube, or a way to achieve celebrity for a couple of months. It is not a way to bring about social change. You know, so yes, it is time, if you are serious about what you're talking about, to get busy. Suppose you think Trump is a fascist. Let's say your assumption is right, that Trump is a fascist. The next question that I would ask you is, well, what do you propose that we do? Suppose he is lying about, and I agree, by the way, I agree with you that the potentiality could be more than a detente. It could be the time for something more positive, a more positive peace. That's yet to be determined. But I do share a certain sense of your optimism that this is not just another go-round. It looks to be, by the way, something in advance of the peaceful coexistence and detente policies of the 1960s and 70s between the Soviet Union and the United States. This looks much bigger. And I think you are right, Garland. It looks to be something on the level of reconfiguring the world system of great powers. Because you're not just talking about two, quote, superpowers, you're talking about three now. But then you're talking about all of the networks and relationships that the three are in or not in. For example, Donald Trump is going to meet with Russia, China, and himself. Well, if they were to vote, you already got 2-1. He comes in at a certain disadvantage. But then if Russia and China were not enough, you have the BRICS. And all of the major, except Japan, the major Asian nations are in BRIC. India, China, and Indonesia, and others are knocking at the door to get in. So BRICS ultimately will become an Afro-Asian, Latin American economic political configuration. It doesn't take rocket science to see what is ascending and what is descending. The Asian and African bloc is ascending. The European American bloc is descending. Now, Trump gets this right. I have no use for Europe. I have no use for NATO. You know what I'm saying? In some ways, it's comical, the way he just kicks these white nations to the curb. But I want to invite Xi Jinping to my inauguration. And the last I heard, he didn't invite Bibi Netanyahu to his inauguration, nor the Prime Minister of Britain or of Germany or France. He treats them as a spent political force on the world stage. And I think you're right about this, Garland. Whether he says it all or not, he sees the future in Asia. And it is. He understands that China has reindustrialized, and wow, yeah, that's
the fascist. That's the guy that's the fascist.
The so-called fascist, yeah. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. But you can't believe anything he says,
no,
because he's a liar, But what I wanted to say is, if you don't see Asia as the future, and people keep talking about the United States as the largest economy in the world. Well, that's questionable. It's how you measure that, whether you use GDP or whether you use PPP, purchasing power parity. In other words, purchasing power parity is a way of measuring the size of one's economy based upon what that currency will buy. GDP is based upon the inflation of that currency, hence that it will buy less at higher prices. So you're measuring with GDP, you're measuring inflation. With PPP, you're measuring actual production. And if you use purchasing power parity, the Chinese economy is the largest economy in the world. And I believe that is the case. It accounts for, I think, something like 40% of industrial production in the world. And then you connect that to Russia and technology and AI as they will use it. I mean, Trump is not a complete idiot. And part of his transactional way of doing things means that he's less driven by ideological predispositions and more driven by what works economically and financially. He wants to reindustrialize the United States. Well, he has his methods of wanting to do that. I would question it. But can he reindustrialize the United States without Chinese investment? I don't think so. Can the United States be reindustrialized without capital coming from many countries in the world? Now, I'm just saying this, and people say, well, are you supporting capitalism? That's not what I'm trying to say. I am trying to say that Trump, to reindustrialize America, needs peace with China. He needs an end to the war in Ukraine. He, just to achieve his domestic ambitions, which I think are his central ones, he needs peace. And therefore, he had to rein in, I think, Bibi Netanyahu and that wild government. So this is where we are. I firmly disagree with all this negativity. Even when I listen to Colonel Douglas McGregor, he is far more skeptical than I am. When I listen to Lawrence Wilkerson, far more skeptical. And these are people who were at the top of the military and military intelligence and strategic intelligence hierarchies. They were at the top. They have contacts, they know people, they have experience. But I would say it is not that experience, it's not the contacts. What assumptions do you proceed from? Is the kind of peace that you describe, that is, Garland, is it possible? And if so, what must we do, Sweet Honey and the Rock? We who believe in freedom, what must we do to guarantee a positive peace in the face of this juggernaut that was unleashed by the Biden administration, which again brought us close to world war? And the nuclear brinksmanship of the Biden administration. People don't know brinksmanship is foreign policy that keeps the world on edge, that always wants to bring humanity to the brink of war, even nuclear war, and such. That was the Biden administration. That is what they were about. And so to have defeated them was an important stage for the American people. They were defeated by those people who in the Democratic primary said abandon Biden. Over 100,000 of them voted non-committed. By those students, 100 universities, no small matter, which affected the world and the world's opinion about the American people. They were supported internationally. Of those, the people that you always talk about, Garland, that nobody kind of talks to, people don't think they're intelligent, who said, well, I don't know everything about Trump and I don't agree with everything about him. But I have to send a message to this ruling elite that you aren't just going to do whatever you want to do and send us in to all of this pain and suffering because of your inflation, because of your wars and stuff. So that's the way I'm looking at it. It might sound as though when we talk, Garland, that we are not the most sophisticated, but I think more than sophistication, we're in touch with the spirit, the aspirations, the language, of ordinary Black folk. I know I am. And I have come to believe that you got, like here in Pennsylvania, you got North Philadelphia and West Philly. That's where Black people more or less live, in Philly. And then you got Butler, Pennsylvania. That's an all-white small city on the western part of the state. We don't know each other. The people of North Philly don't know the people of Butler. The people of Butler don't know the Black people of North Philly, but then we do know each other because we know in one or another way that our circumstance is the same. We both know about deindustrialization. We know about automation on the waterfront that took away thousands of jobs. We know about the shuttered factories all over North Philly. And I'm telling you, Garn, you come to Philly, I'll give you a tour of deindustrialization and suffering. I can show you it. So I might not sound as sophisticated as some people try to perform, but my language and my sense of reality, my epistemology is anchored to the ordinary woman and man. And I think that they, in the end, are going to win. They are going to win this. They are going to decide this in ways that we don't yet understand. They will decide it. They decided the November 2024 election. The people decided that, not Donald Trump. It was too much against one person for him to have overcome it all. It was the people who refused to accept the assumptions and propaganda of the ruling elite. And this is, in a lot of ways, the modern 21st century American version of the class struggle. Not the 19th century, not the early 20th century. This is the 21st century version of the same thing. And the people are, I sense, are thinking, how do we take power? How do people that share our values take power? What would a democratic society look like? And every working person, more than themselves, are concerned about their children. I mean, they are concerned about their children being educated, about their children being safe, about cities being clean, our neighborhoods being kept clean, that we get all of this drug trading out of our communities, that for the young men and women that think that is the way out, we have to show them through education, through recreation, through good food, good shelter, good health care, that their lives matter. And that's what the people want. And if Trump creates an opening for that, they're not going to be opposed to Trump at all. In fact, you scratch below the surface, most of the Black people that we talk about are not that anti-Trump.
Oh, no.
No, not at all.
I'll say this. I saw it was CNN or somebody. They went into this barber shop, and they were. You might have saw it, and they were talking to people, and what do you think about Trump? Is he a racist? And the people was like, well, I haven't seen. They were expecting the same way if you go into some San Francisco Starbucks.
Yeah.
That they would say Trump. They were like, well, I ain't saying that. None of them wanted to go in that direction. And it was obvious that they weren't buying it. And I say, one last thing I'll finish with, you and I, people know, both of our fathers were longshoremen. Mm-hmm. And I think that one of the things I've noticed, and it's offending to me, some of these, we'll call them the liberals, right? Oh, yeah, these Trumps supporters riding around in their pickup trucks with their Trump sticker on, and they got on a what do you call it, a camouflage hat and all this kind of stuff, right? And then you can tell that they have nothing but derision and contempt for the guy that they see in the pickup truck with the camouflage hat and this on, right? My dad had a third grade education.
Yeah.
My dad wore a hard hat. He's a longshoreman. My dad drove a pickup truck. He wasn't white. And let's just say, and you might see him in a camouflage hat. And let's say he was a longshoreman. I'll tell you this, he didn't have the cleanest mouth in the world when it came to the way he expressed himself verbally, right? He was a longshoreman. He said what he had to say. He cut you out in a second, right? So when I see these liberals, black, white, or whatever, intellectuals, have contempt for that guy in that pickup truck with the camouflage hat and this and that, I can't have contempt for that guy. I grew up seeing that every day. I grew up, my dad, come on out here. We got to change the brakes on my truck. I said, okay. We went out and changed the brakes on this. Whatever he was doing, he had his toolkit in the back. He did the stuff that a guy who doesn't have an education, but he's a hard worker, will do to survive and provide for his family. And now I'm supposed to hate the Trump supporter that he in his old pickup truck. I can't hate that guy. I grew up with that guy. He just wasn't a white guy, but he was a black guy.
Oh, yeah. I mean, as you describe your father, in some ways that sounds like my father in a pickup truck going down to the riverfront, getting there at 6 a.m., so you can begin work at 7. Of course, the longshoremen are now being threatened, jobs being threatened with AI and robotics. I mean, that's not only where my heart is, that's where my epistemology begins. I can't do it. I can't be any other way, Garland. And yes, this is an existential moment. Yes, I think most things will be changed. I don't even know if the Democratic Party can survive this. I don't know that they can survive. They seem to be a spent and exhausted political force. The most dynamic political movement in the country is the MAGA movement. And it is not of a single mind. Steve Bannon is not going to concede anything to anybody in this movement. And he has his own ideas. He thinks he's Lenin, as he even said. I don't know about that, but he sees himself in the sense of some kind of revolutionary, some kind of force for radical change. Maybe he is, maybe he's not. But people like ourselves, Garland, we in the game. I haven't gone anywhere. I'm where I've always been, at the grassroots level. And so let's all do what we must do to bring about the change that is necessary if our people, our working people, our Black people, our youth and children are to survive.
Where can people find all your stuff online and all the good work you're doing with the Saturday Free School?
Just the Saturday Free School. Do a Google and the Saturday Free School for Philosophy and Black Liberation, and everything will come up, including our YouTubes. We meet every Saturday, and it's open to the public, where we discuss every issue. This Saturday, tomorrow, we're going to be discussing Trump's inauguration and possible futures for the people. We're completing our year of Baldwin, which was extraordinary. I mean, really extraordinary. But we're completing that, and we're moving on to other projects. Our emphasis is the political and ideological education of the people. And that's the way we operate in this city. We think that Philadelphia is an important place for all kinds of reasons, not least of all John Coltrane and Lee Morgan, but that's another question. But also because it is the sixth largest city, I often compare or see as equivalent places Chicago and Philadelphia. Poor cities, poor people, but with rich histories of resistance. So that's what we do. And when I'm not on your podcast, I'm doing the work of the Free School.
All right, everyone. As you know, there's a lot of censorship going on, so please share this on all your social media platforms. YouTube, sure, they ain't gonna help us. Trust me when I tell you that. If you ever look at my analytics, you'll look up and you're like, "How did you have twice as many views and half as many subscribers?" That never makes sense to me. But we're gonna keep doing what we're doing. Thank you very much, Tony, and all of you. Thank you. Share this on your Facebook and X and Telegram and all that kind of stuff, and follow me on all of those. We also have a join button right now, so subscribe and hit the like button, and if you can join, click the join button, and we'll get lots more members. Thank you very much. We are out. Oops, no, I'm hitting the wrong button here.